Welcome to Discovering. Throughout the summer, I've checked back in with Bernie and the bees. We'll take a look at what's been happening.
An older queen is bigger and larger abdomen.
The powdered sugar and the heat of this half cup of bees being together is going to dislodge the mites from the bee's body.
And it's time for the beekeeper to take his share of the honey.
There's a nice frame. Close to 10 pounds of honey in that.
And Kristen was in the Keweenaw for a visit to Old Victoria. Stick around, that's all tonight, right here on Discovering.
The secret streams that flow beneath the cliffs of colored stone. Forest thick and healthy with birch and pine and oak. Surrounded by the greatest lakes this world has ever known. Black Bear's awesome presence as he roams the hills and fields. Call of the timber wolf, the loon's lonesome trill. The eagle soaring high above, the trout lies deep and still. These are what I treasure, the only way I measure feelings that I have for this fine land. There is so much to discover when you're a long-time lover of northern Michigan.
So the bees have been busy all summer doing their thing, collecting pollen and making honey.
He's looking for a place to deposit that pollen.
It's time for the beekeeper to take his share of the honey they've made. Before we see how that's done, we'll take a look at a couple of beekeepers' jobs that took place over the last couple of months.
Today we're going to be working on this overwintered hive, which is very strong. And when you have an overwintered hive, you have to do something with them or they're going to swarm. So you can do a split where you take one hive and you turn it into two, or you can do like what we're going to do today. We're going to take it and make a nuke. Nuke is short for nucleus. It's a beginning. It's a 5-frame box of bees, and I will be buying a queen to go in that one. Somewhere in here is going to be all the brood, but also the queen could be in there, and if we just dug right in, we run the chance of what they call rolling her, and you would actually kill her by pulling her out. So we're going to take out a couple, or one frame at least from the end. You check it over for the queen, and she ain't here. So we're going to move on and see where the brood is. This one has honey, but no brood. They bring the pollen in, and then they pack it in these cells. And then generally what it'll be in, like in an arch, and this will be for brood. Brood meaning the baby bees. And then they mix the pollen with honey, and that makes bee bread. And that's for baby bees. Adult bees only eat honey, and queens only eat royal jelly. This is sealed honey. It's capped. And that means it's down to 16% humidity. And this up in here is kind of what you'd probably call green honey. They know when it gets to 16%, it starts out at about 70 or 80%. And they'll start fanning, and they fan through the hive. And when the honey gets dried enough, then it's sealed off and it won't ferment. Otherwise, it'll ferment. This is a nice one too. And there's a lot here getting ready to seal. You can see some of them are partially sealed, which means they're really close.
An older queen is bigger and larger abdomen. Young queens are harder to spot. They're not much bigger than a worker.
There she is right there. See her?
I usually go through and I start looking for her eggs, because that means she's real close to that area. And I kind of scan over the frame, and she kind of looks like a spider walking around to me, not like a 6-legged bee.
So what we're going to do now is I'm going to pull out 2 frames out of the nuke. This one is just a beautiful pattern on here, and that's what I want. We'll get another one like that, and there's another one. Look at that. It's almost solid bees or brood.
Yeah, it's capped brood.
Oh, that's beautiful. She's on here. Okay, so I gotta be there. This hive is ready for transportation. The entrance is sealed with screens so that they can't come out. We'll tighten down the strap on the top, and we can take it over to our home yard, and I don't have to worry about them filling the car and enjoying the ride. So I'll leave this sealed for 24 hours, otherwise they'll come boiling out and they'll get lost. And then they reorientate themselves. You see them doing circles up here. This is the easy part right here. Set it up here. These are my skunk guards. Skunks love bees.
Another task of the beekeeper is to check for mites by what's known as a sugar roll.
What we're looking for to do a mite count, a sugar roll mite count, is we're looking for frames of brood. The mites hang out on the nurse bees that are caring for the brood, waiting to jump into a cell that is about to be capped, because that's where they reproduce, inside a capped cell of bees. So I'm trying to get a half cup of bees, and one way to do it is just to run a jar down a frame of bees and put a cover on them. I'll put about 2 tablespoons of sugar on the top, regular old powdered sugar. Then I'm going to shake and roll the bees for a minute. The powdered sugar and the heat of this half cup of bees being together is going to dislodge the mites from the bee's body. Now we actually set this aside for 3 to 5 minutes. Now we start shaking them out, and because I've got this number 8 hardware cloth in here, the mites will fall through and the bees will stay in my jar. At different times of year, a higher level of mites is acceptable. Here we are early in the spring buildup season, and we only want a 1% infestation or less of mites. All right. I'll spray a little water. Here's 1 mite, 2 mites. So a sample of half a cup of bees is a sample of 300 bees. So I've got 2 mites in 300 bees, which means it's less than 1% mite infestation for this hive. So it's doing well. In the early 80s, the beekeeping community realized that the Varroa mite had made a successful leap over to the western honeybee from its native Asian honeybee. And it's been so successful that now across the United States, you don't have to wonder if you've got mites in your hive. We just assume that we all have mites in our hive to deal with. Our job is actually to manage the mite load, not try to eradicate them totally. So we try to keep the mites all year long below a 3% infestation. Besides being parasites on the bee body, they also lower the bee's immunity, and they bring with them dozens of viruses that infect the bees. For hives that aren't managed to keep mite loads low, there's literally 100% certainty that your hive will die within 1 to 3 years. So we need to manage our mites in order to have healthy bees long term. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 mites. At this time of year, we're looking for just a 1% infestation. So Bernie, you're going to have to treat your bees.
I had planned on it anyways.
All right. Bye, girls.
As the bee season approaches its end, it's time for the beekeeper to collect his share of the honey, leaving behind the bees' share, enough to feed them through the winter.
For me as a beekeeper, the season is over. We're going to be pulling the honey off today. For people who have just 1 hive and only a little honey, they use what they call a bee escape. This is just a little bee escape. What it does is it allows bees to go down into this plastic tube, and they come out here, and there's 2 wires in there. And they spread apart as the bee goes through, but then they close themselves up so the bee can't get back in. So you put this on an inner cover, which has a hole designed for this. You set it down, the bees go down, and they empty the super being my honey, or the beekeeper's honey, and they go down and they can't come back. And you come back in a couple of days and you can take them off and almost be bee free. There might be a couple in there. When you have a lot of hives, you can't do that. If you have a lot of supers like we do here, it's kind of impractical. You could, but I like to move along a little quicker, so we use fume boards. And this is a fume board right here. It has like a solar panel on this side, and that's supposed to heat up this side, which has this, it's an almond smelling substance that the bees don't like. I'll put a couple of X's in here in a little square, set it on top of the hive, and leave it for 4 or 5 minutes, and that'll drive the bees down. So we're gonna run a little X across here, make it stink good. Then go over here, figure out how I'm gonna do this. Now sometimes this will drive the bees all the way down to the bottom box. And that's what you want. There's a couple of bees in there. And then you put this on diagonally. I'm not quite sure why, but you leave the corners open. And I'm guessing that helps penetrate the hive with this smell they're not real happy with. So now we'll go and do the next one. There you go. They're making some noise. There you go. Looks like they're down one box almost completely. Ideal is to be able to just take the box off and put it in the car, but real often they'll get hung up and you can't get them out, so you have to use a bee brush and take it frame by frame and put them into a fresh box. So I'll take this off and I'll take that box off and I set it over on my platform here, and then I use a bee brush to brush them off. There's a lot of bees in there yet. Not as much honey as I expected. Been a strange year. There's only a couple of good frames in this one. There's not a lot of honey in there. This is still uncapped. You can see it in the cells. It's not capped yet. When we get other ones down the ways, and maybe even the next one, on this one, it should be capped. You can see it. This is what a cap looks like right here. They cap it off. That means it's down to 16% in humidity. They get the water down from the 90s to down to 16%. And then the super goes into the back of the car and you seal it all up, because bees are great robbers. And if you leave it open here, they're going to be all over it. So the idea is to get as few honeybees in the honey house when we're extracting as possible. My wife doesn't like bees buzzing around her when she's working there, so we try and get most of them out. They're never have been aggressive. Here is a different story. You're taking their honey off, especially when we get down towards the bottom and we get next to the brood box. Sometimes they get a little feisty, and sometimes they can start out feisty. We're going to find out today where they're going to start. I have a long sleeve shirt. You can see there's more capped way up in here. So there's going to be a lot more honey in this one. I have a really nice bee jacket. It's a double thick with a veil and all, but the cameraman stole it. And there's a frame with all capped honey in it. Not a bad looking frame. You'd like them to bulge it out more, sticking out probably this far, but for some reason they capped it short. Back when I started, that's what even commercial beekeepers wore. They wore khaki shirt, long sleeves, and khaki pants. Now, of course, modern technology, we got all these nice bee suits and that, but you could do it without it, and I have in the past. I've only used a jacket a few times. This is 100% beeswax foundation. Most of the stuff I have has a plastic center and then it's coated with beeswax. This is 100% beeswax and it has wires in it. The downside is that sometimes when they get bored, it gets quiet. They'll eat holes in these. The reason they're out here now is that that smell is still in there and it's hot, and there were a couple of boxes they were in before. So you got all those bees that were in 4 boxes are now into 2. They'll be out here until they cool down and until they settle down. This one was a little weaker, so it didn't matter. Those 2 bigger ones in the middle there, they're probably going to be outside for a while, especially the one that has 3 on. So they'll work their way in now. Even these over here, they'll hang around until it gets cool, and then in they go to the right hive. It's called bearding in the summer. When it gets real hot, sometimes they'll beard like this all by themselves. It's called bearding. They'll do that before a swarm sometimes. Now they're doing it because it stinks in there. They're going to stand on this outside and they're going to fan. Now they fan the honey the same way to dry it out. Now they're going to be fanning to get the smell of my honey robber out. It's all part of beekeeping. They build bridges between the boxes, and they're bridges of comb, and it makes it hard to lift the box up. So you got to kind of twist it a little. There's a lot more bees per square inch in there now than there was before. We squeezed them down to 2. Everybody gets 2. You can see them in there drinking that honey because they know something's going on. They're going to grab as much as they can. So the next time you see us, we'll be taking the honey out of these frames, cutting off the cappings, that's the wax on the outer edges, and then we put it in an extractor. It whips the honey out.
This is Old Victoria Restoration. My name is Lynette Weber, and I am a volunteer here. I've been volunteering here for the past 9 years. The Victoria Copper Mining Company was founded in 1899 to revive old copper mines up here on Forest Hill outside of Rockland. So the first thing they did was to erect temporary housing with 20 log cabins. 10 of them were right here on this site, and 10 of them were at the sawmill location down the North Country Trail from here. These cabins are 4 of the 10 that were originally built in the lower log location in 1899. They finished these cabins up before the ice went out on the river that year because there was no bridge yet. They had to get them built quickly. And originally there were 20 log cabins, but then they built 50 frame houses as well, and the population of Victoria peaked at around 750 individuals. This was all company owned. So the company built the cabins and the rest of the houses, and you had to be associated with the company to be able to stay in them. So it wasn't anybody's family home or homestead, but instead families came and went over the years, meaning that these aren't just the family homes of a few families, but actually of hundreds. The Victoria Copper Mining Company operated from 1899 until 1921, at which point copper prices had fallen post-war, and it was very difficult to maintain a labor force up here when there was $5 days being offered in the Detroit area by Henry Ford. And when the company shut down in 1921, the miners left this area. It wasn't until 1976 that the Society for the Restoration of Old Victoria was founded to salvage the history here and to interpret it for our future. It was a part of one of the bicentennial projects. We're still a non-profit funded primarily by cinnamon roll sales and donations. This is Log Cabin Day, and it's held on the last Sunday of June every year. It's a Michigan legislated holiday to celebrate our log cabin pioneer heritage. And I feel that it's especially important for us to celebrate it up here at Old Victoria because the sense of place, the history of the Keweenaw is what makes it so special. And so we're telling the Copper Country story and keeping it alive in spirit for future generations. Another thing that's really special about this site is that it's believed to be the largest group of log cabins on their original foundations in the Midwest. Many historical sites have relocated buildings from other sites, and other communities to be together in a collected village, but it's a collection. It's not an organic, natural setting. And so we're very fortunate here to have that type of setting. In addition to this lower log location, 10 cabins that we call Old Victoria today, there are other neighborhoods. One of them is called the Sawmill location. 10 log cabins were built here in 1899 when the mine first started up. And in these houses right here lived the men who worked with the horses in the logging part of the operation, and the men who worked at the sawmill. And then there is the top of the hill, the top of the pay scale up at the mine site, where the frame houses, including the captain's house, which still stands at the end of the road today, were built. This big hole here, this is the site of the former boarding house. It's this big one right here. In the background, you can see the captain's house we've just passed. The mine employed as many as about 250 at one time, and when you add families onto that, that can create quite a large number of people on the site. There was a company store, a post office. There was a movie theater installed in 1917 in their community hall. So while it might seem very small today and is definitely a ghost town, things were a little bit different here around 1910. The Liberty Theater was purchased from Hurley, Wisconsin in 1917 as a used setup, and then the company hired somebody to play the organ for all of their silent film showings. So there was an organ player employed by the mining company. Old Victoria Restoration is open daily from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. through the peak of the summer season, with reduced hours available as we near the autumn months. A 1-hour tour is pretty typical for these 4 buildings, the site and the sauna, although if you're strapped for time, we can do a mini tour that's only 1 cabin.
That's it for tonight. We'll be extracting and bottling the fruits of the bees and the beekeepers' labor in an upcoming show soon. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week right here on Upper Michigan's very own Discovering.